Okay, it looks like the attendees are joining now. So I think we can go ahead and get started. Thank you all for joining us. Appreciate you being a part of this. Glad that you have interest in the NJEDA's Brownfield Loan Program. I did want to make just a couple housekeeping notes here. First of all, the webinar is being recorded, and we will be posting the webinar and the slides on our website. All participants will be muted during the webinar. And we are also asking everyone to please submit your questions via the Q&A feature, and you can submit them to all. I encourage you to go ahead and submit your questions as you think of them. And then we will get to the questions at the end of the webinar. I will also note that questions that do come in, if they're related specifically to the Brownfield Loan Program, may be incorporated into our FAQ document, which is public facing, as well as the fact that this webinar is public facing. So be aware of that as you put your questions in. And with that, let's get underway. So I am Elizabeth Limbrick. I should have said that earlier. Elizabeth Limbrick. I am the Director of Brownfields and Sustainable Systems at the New Jersey Economic Development Authority. And it's my pleasure to be your host today. Here is our agenda for today. We're going to talk a little bit about how this fits with the governor's plan and the benefits of the Brownfield Loan Program. We're going to give you an overview, talk about the terms and conditions. We'll talk about what the eligible activities are, as well as what the base eligibility requirements are for applicants submitting applications. There's a scoring process because this is in fact a competitive program. And then there's opportunities to have your interest rate reduced as well, where you intersect with some of the priority features that we're looking for. And we'll talk about how to apply, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. So many of you may know this, and you may have seen this happening over the past year and a half or so, but at the New Jersey Economic Development Authority, we've really been broadening and deepening how we engage with the community, and how we're doing more community development, more sustainable development, more brownfield redevelopment. There's been a recent realignment within EDA, and now Brownfields and Sustainable Systems is within the Community Revitalization Department at the New Jersey Economic Development Authority. We are growing, and we are also looking for staff as well. So if you know people who are interested in this kind of work, please let us know. We are really taking a holistic approach to revitalizing contaminated sites by targeting brownfield sites to drive economic growth. Now, if you think about it, brownfields, economic justice, environmental justice, social justice, this is all intersects with sustainability. This is all interdependent, tied together. And brownfields really are a great lever for driving that economic growth in an equitable way that also promotes environmental sustainability. And we can really push to get resources and money and jobs and a quality of life back in to especially distressed areas when we do brownfield redevelopment. And we're really looking at economic justice and, again, environmental justice at the same time. Inclusive and equitable development strategies have been the cornerstone of Governor Murphy's administration, and throughout his administration, we really have been renewing and enhancing our commitment to brownfield redevelopment. Brownfield redevelopment is a great way to drive inclusive and equitable development because we're fostering a better and more supportive business climate. We're achieving faster median wage growth. These all support these larger goals of closing racial, gender, wage, and employment gaps, creating the most diverse innovation ecosystem, in the United States, helping us really move that needle on our goal to double venture capital investment in the state. And obviously, they encourage thriving and inclusive New Jersey urban centers and downtowns with a focus on reducing poverty. Really, no matter how you look at brownfields and the redevelopment, I think it really is a positive, whether that is protecting human health and the environment, or creating jobs, restoring local tax base, or just simply improving the quality of life. Brownfields really are a positive. And again, I mentioned that we've been expanding our work, and we now have an entire suite of brownfield programs to provide additional investment resources. And we're partnering with sister agencies and providing technical assistance. Our programs really are statewide, but have that emphasis on urban areas where brownfields tend to be more concentrated. So this is a list of a lot of many of the different programs that we have at EDA now. So we're looking at environmental justice, we're looking at climate change resilience. We have been partnering with the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection on the Community Collaborative Initiative, which embeds DEP staff in 12 communities. That really helps foster those relationships to drive the projects and get them done. We've been working more with DCA and other state agencies as well, and looking at how we can leverage opportunity zones. We have a partnership with the New Jersey Institute of Technology for their Brownfields Assistance Center, and that's really exciting, and that provides free resources to public sector and nonprofit entities that are looking to get involved in brownfields, whether that's in the planning stages of it or the actual remediation pieces of it. They have the expertise there that can help you. And again, it's a free resource, so I definitely recommend checking that out. But today, I know we're here to talk about the Brownfield Loan Program, which I'm super excited about. Applications are open now. We'll talk a little more, but just to kind of also set the stage for some other things that are coming down the pike. We also are going to be launching a Brownfield Impact Fund, which is supported very generously by the United States Environmental Protection Agency. We received a Brownfield Revolving Loan Fund grant from them, so that will be launching later this year. We have an assessment grant pending with them, so these are competitive programs. We're waiting to hear if we are going to be selected for an award on that. And also the big one, which is on my next slide here, is the Brownfield Redevelopment Incentive. And I just wanted to put a teaser in here because I know a lot of people are very interested in hearing about this specific program. And this is going to be rolling out in the coming months. We'll say we don't have a specific timeline on it, but the new Brownfield Redevelopment Incentive is going to have an annual cap of 50 million, 50, which is absolutely huge and amazing. And so happy that our legislature and the Murphy administration have been so supportive of brownfield redevelopment and see the value in this, that they are allocating up to $50 million a year for this program. There'll be a project cap on that. So $4 million or 40% of the remediation costs. It's a one-time tax credit. So what we mean by that is this is not like spread over a bunch of years. What we're saying is that when you complete the remediation, that's when you come in, you get your tax credit. What's really great about this program is that you can sell and transfer that tax credit as well. So I think that's going to be a really nice enhancement to that program. We're going to be working with the Department of Environmental Protection to create evaluation criteria so that we can create that competitive application process and the scoring matrix for that. As with all of our programs at EDA, you have to demonstrate that a project financing gap exists. And again, you saw that portfolio of other brownfield supports that we have at EDA, and this is going to complement that as well. Again, this fits in right with the priorities of the Governor Murphy's administration again: human health, protecting human health, the environment, increasing the tax base, creating jobs, and reutilizing existing infrastructure. So when you redevelop a brownfield site, you're saving, usually I think the figure I've heard tossed around is something like, for every acre of brownfield site redeveloped, you're saving 4.5 acres of a green field. So, we're really directing the development so that New Jersey can continue to grow. We are the densest state in the nation, and we want to continue to grow, but we want to grow in the right places. And so brownfields really are the answer to that. With that in mind, we are in the process right now of taking the law that was enacted and translating that into an actual program and writing the rules and regulations around that. So the law, tells us, this is what you need to do, but within this area, there's opportunity to create a really great program. And so, we can't change what's in the law, but we really can work within what's in the statute and create a great program. And so to that, what I'm going to ask folks to do is that we have created a very special web portal here, which is on our website at njeda.com/Economic Recovery Act. And, please give us your input on, what you think would be helpful as we create the rules and regulations for these programs. And I will also add to this, which is, this is the only way we are accepting public comment on our incentive programs. Is you have to go to that website to provide your comment. If you email me, if you put it in the chat today, if you call me, those comments will not be incorporated. It needs to go through this formal process. But we really do want to hear from you. So here we are. This is the meat. This is why so many of you tuned in today, because you want to hear about this brownfield loan program. Again, we're really excited about this. It does provide investment resources for remediation, abatement, and demolition activities to promote the redevelopment of brownfield sites for commercial, retail, and mixed-use development or expansion. And the benefits of this program: one is that we provide financing for demolition and asbestos and lead-based paint removal. I pulled those specific criteria out because that is something that very few other programs fund. So we're really proud that we were able to incorporate that into this program. And in addition to that, we have really favorable terms that are designed specifically with brownfields in mind. So we have that 10-year term, but there's no payments for the first 2 years. And then the next 2 years are interest only. And we start with a pretty low rate of 3%. And then there's an opportunity, which we'll talk about later, to actually get a lower rate if your project meets some specific criteria. Again, this is a competitive program. So you're going to be competing against others for access to that loan pool of $15 million. The loans, the minimum is $100,000 and the maximum loan amount is $5 million. Again, we're accepting applications now through April 13th. You have to have your application submitted by April 13th or it will not be considered. Just a little note about how we're going to be doing disbursements. So the initial disbursement will be made upon commencement of the work, and then additional disbursements will be made as project components are completed up to that 10% retainage. If you have questions about this program, please email us at this dedicated email address, which is brownfieldsloan@njeda.com by March 25th. And we will be posting the questions and answers on our website in a frequently asked questions or FAQ document. So on the terms, we talked about this 10-year term, no payments for the first 2 years, interest only for years 3 and 4, followed by an amortization of the remaining term, no penalties for prepayment. One important point, though, I want to point out to you is that full repayment of the loan is due at either the end of the loan term or the closing of construction financing, whichever comes first. The fees for this program, I think, you want to know what you're jumping into. So here's what we have. We have an application fee of $2,500. We have a commitment fee of 0.875%. Also a closing fee of 0.875% of the loan, and any other fees that we deem necessary to complete the loan, such as a title search as well. So all of those fees are non-refundable. So keep that in mind as you're applying. But this is very consistent with the other products that NJEDA provides. I also want to be very upfront about the conditions on the loan. So first of all, you will need to put a lien on your property. So it has to be subordinated to the purchase mortgage, and it will be removed upon repayment. You also need to record a deed restriction that requires for 10 years after completion of the remediation that the redevelopment is consistent with what you said that you're going to do in the application. So basically, you're going to be telling us how you're going to reuse the site, and we're going to be using that information to score your application and determine your eligibility and determine any applicable interest rate reductions. And so we want to make sure you're going to do what you said you're going to do. So that's part of the reason behind the need to record this deed notice. There's also, I mentioned earlier, a 10% retainage of the total loan amount that will not be fully dispersed until the project receives your either remedial action outcome or a response action outcome, your RAO, or equivalent document showing that the remediation has been completed. We are expecting that all cost estimates will include a contingency of at least 15% of the total cost estimate for the established remedial activities. I would also add about prevailing wage and affirmative action. So these loan products, just like a lot of our other products at EDA, are subject to our prevailing wage and affirmative action requirements. And this applies not only to the remediation portion of your project, but to the full redevelopment project that you propose in your application. This also carries through to your subcontractors. So borrowers are going to need to maintain and submit certified payrolls to document compliance. And I would also add, when we think about when does prevailing wage kick in, what does it apply to? It applies to construction. And if you're thinking that this is not a construction project, I would say you're wrong. Anytime you are drilling or digging, whether that's a hand auger, a shovel, a backhoe, a post hole digger, that is construction. The collection of soil, groundwater, rock samples is construction or alteration work as referenced in the public works definition. And this could also extend to even collecting vapor samples from the subsurface if you're using a drill or similar kind of apparatus. I'd also want to note to you guys that the New Jersey Prevailing Wage Act also requires companies to comply with a relatively new apprenticeship program. And so all construction contracts awarded in New Jersey that require payment of prevailing wage must also provide proof of valid construction contractor registration certification and proof of participation of registered apprenticeship program if you're employing craft workers. So, be cognizant of that as you're putting this together. And there's more information on that act that can be found on the Department of Labor's website. Also on the slide, I just wanted to point out that there is a requirement that the applicant must provide owner equity equal to a minimum of 10% of the appraised value of the property in a remediated state. And when we're talking about equity, some examples for you that could include cash, development fees, your costs for remediation and redevelopment project feasibility that were incurred within 12 months prior to the application. Could be the property value less any mortgages or liens and the portion of the developer's fee that is delayed for a minimum of 5 years. And any other investments by the developer in the remediation or redevelopment project deemed acceptable by us. And federal, state, and local grant and federal and state tax credits are not considered equity. So on to the eligible activities. So what can you use these funds for? You can use them for your very traditional things that you clearly would think, hey, I'm getting a brownfield loan, I could use it for this. Yes, soil, groundwater, and infrastructure investigation. You can also use it for hazardous materials assessment and survey. So again, like that asbestos survey. Site remediation, you know, that seems clear, right? Hazardous materials and waste disposal. So that's another special one that you don't necessarily see funding for that we're proud of. And then again, this one is, I think, the big one, the building and structural issues, including demolition. That is going to be, I think that's going to be a big one. Asbestos abatement, PCB removal, contaminated wood or paint removal, and other infrastructure remedial activities. You can use it for long-term groundwater monitoring or natural attenuation. You can use it for your engineering and institutional controls. You can also use it for planning, engineering, environmental consulting, and attorney, accounting, and financing fees, with the caveat that soft costs cannot be more than 20% of the loan amount. So I mentioned this is a competitive program. The way this is working, though, is in order to get to the competition, you have to pass our baseline eligibility, or sort of like a threshold, if you're familiar with the EPA terminology. So on this slide, we've listed out what the baseline eligibility requirements are. So again, this is the minimum threshold to even be considered to go to our scoring committee. If you do not meet these requirements, you do not pass go, and your application will be rejected. So this is what you need to provide. You need to have either site control or show us that you have a path to site control. And you can do this through a couple different methods. One is you could provide an executed letter of intent signed and dated by both the applicant and the current site owner. You could provide a purchase contract of the proposed site, as well as any financing agreements associated with the purchase. Or if you own the property, you could submit a copy of the deed. We also are requiring a letter of support from the mayor or the governing body if the mayor does not exist. Municipalities, if you are subject to getting local finance board approval prior to applying for this loan, then you must show us that you have done that. You need to provide a plan for redevelopment of the redevelopment project. So specifically, we're looking for the proposed reuse of the brownfield site, and you need to provide a description of the relation of the reuse plan to the applicable local redevelopment plan, the zoning, and the land use. You're going to have to tell us, again, how all that fits together. You do need to provide an environmental report that's prepared by an LSRP, or if we're talking about structural remediation report, a qualified professional such as a PE, showing that the site is in fact a brownfield site that is known or suspected to have environmental contamination. Under this program, you cannot double dip with your costs. And what I'm trying to say is you can't be duplicative of other approved state and federal grants that had been previously awarded. We have a lot more information on our website, but what I will tell you right here, projects previously approved under NJEDA's Brownfields and Contaminated Site Remediation and Reimbursement Program are not eligible. Now, there's not a ton of those out there. I think, what I've been told is a few dozen. So that's one, though. The other one that I think is probably going to be more applicable to folks on this webinar, projects that were previously approved under the Hazardous Discharge Site Remediation Fund, or HDSRF, cannot use brownfield loan financing for the same uses as the HDSRF funding. So if you've had HDSRF funding, you're going to have to demonstrate to us how these funds will be used in a different manner than the HDSRF funds, that it's something different. Next, you need to provide an appraisal showing that the remediated property has an appraised value equal to or greater than 100% of all debt financing, including the requested brownfield loan amount, or you will need to provide other sources of collateral. You also need to provide, we talked about this earlier, equity equal to 10% of the appraised value in the remediated state. Next one's an important point. The applicant cannot have caused or contributed to the contamination. And again, if you go on our website and you take a look at, there's actually a brownfield certification that applicant needs to submit. It lays it out very clearly, but individuals or entities responsible for, or individual or entities who have common ownership or control with the entities responsible for any existing environmental contamination at the site, or any individuals or entities that have indemnified a party or a party who has common ownership control with a responsible party would not be eligible. There is a caveat that's written in there though, where if the only reason that you're liable under basically the Spill Act is only by owning the site, there is a carve out. So take a look at that. But basically, if you caused or contributed to the contamination, this program is not for you. But if you are a developer who is purchasing, a site for redevelopment, and the only reason that you're being brought in as a liable party would be because of the ownership, that's a different story. We take that into consideration. Again, look at our brownfield certification to get more clarity on that. The next bullet point on here is you do need to include a plan for reuse. And the future reuse of the site has to be either commercial or mixed use. And commercial can include manufacturing and retail uses. Mixed use can include residential among the uses at the site, but it can't be 100% residential. Again, as with our other programs, the redevelopment project needs to be economically feasible, and you need to demonstrate that a funding gap exists. So what do we mean? Economically feasible is defined as having enough cash flow to repay your debt financing, including the brownfield loan. And the funding gap will be supported by a certification from the applicant that after making all good faith efforts to raise additional capital cannot be raised from those other sources. And then finally, if you pass all of that, we will then, and you pass our legal review where we look at just the debarment, stuff like that, you would then go to be scored by our scoring committee. There are 200 points available in the scoring matrix. You have to meet a minimum of 75 points to be considered eligible for the loan. And then we're going to prioritize the access to the funding based on the score. So I'm going to pause for a second. I see there are two questions in the chat. One is, will the presentation and recording be available to all participants? Yes, and not only to all participants, but to anyone who wants to access it. So we will be posting this on our website. And then the other question is about, is there any kind of map or location that shows all of the brownfields in the state of New Jersey? And because brownfields sort of are subjective in that part of the definition is, about being vacant or underutilized and having suspected contamination, the answer to that is no, there's not one source out there that has all of the brownfields shown. However, we are looking to make some improvements. There's an older program out there called SiteMart that shows some of the brownfields in New Jersey. Some of that information was input a very long time ago, so you'd want to look at the date the records were created if you're going to be using that. As well, Sustainable Jersey works with municipalities who are interested in creating brownfield inventories, so you can visit Sustainable Jersey to take a look at what they have. And we are working on putting together some information specifically around the community collaborative initiative communities I mentioned earlier with DEP. There are 12 cities that are designated as community collaborative initiative cities, and we're working to put together a brownfield inventory there as well. But that will likely be posted, hopefully in the next few weeks, either on DEP's website and or on the community asset map that is hosted by the Department of Community Affairs. Okay, so back to the presentation. Scoring. So we just talked about a little bit about scoring. So if you pass that baseline eligibility and you pass like the debarment piece, then your application proceeds to our scoring committee. And we have a limited fund of pools. It's a big pool. It's $15 million, but it's limited. And so what we're going to do is we're going to use the scores to determine the rank of the applications for priority to the funding. I need to point out what's really important here is that just because you score well doesn't mean you're going to get a loan. You still need to pass our underwriting analysis. So keep that in mind. But let's talk about the scoring process first. And sort of generally, these are the general categories shown on this slide that we're looking at. And then I'm going to go into more detail on the next slides. But we're looking at whether or not you're a nonprofit, where the site is located. Is it in an opportunity zone? Remember, we talked about that earlier, trying to align the program, the community collaborative initiative cities, if it's distressed community, the proximity to public transportation, the consistency between the redevelopment project and the local and regional plans. We're looking at the economic benefits of the project. We're the EDA, right? So this is, of course, something we'll be looking at. We're going to look at whether or not there's actually a need for the financing, but also whether or not the project is viable. Public health and environmental benefits. This is actually a pretty good piece of what we're looking at, as well as stakeholder engagement. And again, there's 200 points available. And again, a minimum score of 75 is required to move forward to the underwriting. Applications that don't receive at least 75 points will be declined. So here we go. Let's get deep into it. This is our scoring matrix. So first criteria, again, are you a nonprofit? If yes, you get 5 points. Economic distress is the next criteria. So these are the kinds of things that we're looking at here. Is the site located in one of the 50 most distressed municipalities based on the MRI? And that's a pretty big point. It's 20 points. Is it in an eligible New Jersey opportunity zone? 10 points. Is the site located in a municipality supported by that community collaborative initiative I mentioned? There's points available for that. The next one is very specific about the proximity to public transportation. I don't think I'm going to read this whole thing. You can go back and take a look at it. But again, we're looking at how this fits together with other planning priorities and other TOD type initiatives. The consistency with local plans. Again, we want to know that this project that you're proposing to us is consistent with what the community is looking to have. So you're going to demonstrate that to us, the zoning, and also looking at whether or not you have approval from the host municipality. Then we look at the economic benefit. And again, as the EDA, this is important to us. So we're going to be looking at whether or not this would increase the municipality's tax base. We want to look at the number of full-time jobs created. We want to see how significant the estimated private investment is that is going to occur as a result of this. So is this going to catalyze other projects in the area, more investment? Is the redevelopment of the project going to grow the number of small businesses and attract employers to the area? Again, that's sort of the catalyst approach to this. Does the site have, or does the project have a plan for hiring local residents? You get points for that. The redevelopment of the site, not only having a plan for it, but how do you incorporate workforce development opportunities for those residents? Some additional points. And then if this ties in with our innovation economy, you can get additional points for that as well. Next up is, again, the project viability as well as the need for financing. So we're going to be looking at the level and experience and qualifications of the applicant And we're going to, be looking at the history of successful completion of projects. We're going to look at the strength of the strategic partners. Who are you aligned with, and whether or not they have been able to complete projects in the past successfully. The presence and amount of funding commitments available to support the project, whether or not you have demonstrated that this loan is necessary. If there are DEP or EPA enforcement actions at the site, then you don't earn the 5 points listed here. I know that kind of looks strange because we actually had an FAQ written on that, but not having that, you will earn the points. Have all local, state, and federal approvals necessary to advance the project been received? Whether or not you've done your homework and done your PA and your SI for sites that would require that. Whereas if we're talking about coming in for a non-site remediation kind of project, something like a demolition project, you may not need that. So we would not deny you those points there. But are the public utilities required for the redevelopment project readily available at this site? And you can see all that adds up to 45 points. Next up, again, I mentioned that public health and environmental benefits are really important to us. And you can see that because this is 35 points. So we're looking at, how long has the site been a brownfield? And is there a direct relationship between the contamination and the prior uses? Does the project address an unmet neighborhood, municipal, or regional need? Does the redevelopment of the project include features that will promote or enhance walkability or bikeability? Does the proposed project incorporate higher standards to address sea level rise, increased temperatures, changes in groundwater tables, increased rainfall intensity, or other climate impacts that may affect the performance of the site in the future? Again, this ties back in with the climate change resiliency. And have you demonstrated sustainable practices that you will follow during the awarded phases of the project that could include incorporation of energy efficiency or green energy? And has the project demonstrated other public health and environmental benefits? So again, that adds up to 35 points. And then our last major criteria is the stakeholder engagement. And again, this is important to us, again, as evidenced by the fact that you get 25 points for this. So we want to know that you're working with the community, that you're listening to them, and that you're incorporating their input. So the kinds of things we're looking at are whether or not you have identified the stakeholders critical to the success of the project, whether or not you've identified roles for them, and whether or not that includes local environmental justice interests. And has the applicant identified the communication channels that will be used to communicate with the stakeholders? How are you going to communicate with them? Is it going to be via email? Is it going to be in person? How are you doing this? And has the project been discussed at an open public meeting, or is the project on the agenda of an open public meeting at the time of the application? And also, we want to know, again, that you're providing ample opportunity for meaningful engagement with the community. So that is, has the community provided any feedback? And if so, how have you incorporated that into the project? So again, all of this adds up to 200 points. And that's the maximum you could get. And the minimum required to advance, again, is 75. So take a break there. The rate reductions. So I mentioned this earlier. So we started at 3% interest rate, but there is an opportunity to reduce that by 20 basis points for each of the criteria listed below. And we go down to a floor of 2%. So that's the lowest you could get if the proposed redevelopment project design includes the following. So first, mixed-use residential project consisting of newly constructed residential units where the developer will reserve at least 20%, but not more than 50% of the residential units constructed by low and moderate income households with affordability controls. If the project is in an urban food desert and the redevelopment project includes a food delivery source, there's an opportunity for rate reduction there. And by food delivery source, we mean access to nutritious foods such as fruits, fresh fruits and vegetables through grocery operators, including but not limited to a full-size supermarket or grocery store or other healthy food retailer of at least 10,000 square feet, including but not limited to a prepared food establishment selling primarily nutritious, ready-to-serve meals. The next one is a healthcare or health services center with a minimum of 10,000 square feet of space devoted to primary healthcare or health services and is located in a distressed municipality with an MRI of 50 or lower. The next one is whether or not the project qualifies as a tourism destination project, which means a non-gaming business facility that will be among the most visited privately owned or operated tourism or recreation sites in the state, and which has been determined by the authority to be an area appropriate for development and in need of economic development incentive assistance, and is located within an established tourism district, and which will have a significant impact on the economic viability of that district. Next is, I think one of the ones that might be the easiest to achieve is whether or not the project includes electric vehicle charging station installations in at least 25% of the parking spaces located at the redevelopment project. Also, I think this is also a little forward thinking, and we developed this prior to COVID, so I'm pretty proud of us for thinking of this. A parking area at the redevelopment project that's capable of conversion to commercial space if there's a decrease in demand for parking. Whether or not the project includes an incubator facility or collaborative workspaces. And then the last one is if the project includes a revitalization of historic sites and structures defined as an income producing structure or site associated with the history of New Jersey that is on the state or national register of historic places or is eligible for placement on the state or national register. And again, I just want to note here that a deed restriction for 10 years after completion of the remediation will be placed on the project, requiring that redevelopment to be consistent, not only with the proposed end use factors considered at the time of application, but also those considered for eligibility and interest rate reductions. So, taking you through that. So now you're going to say, all right, I am so excited. I need to apply. How do I do it? Okay, so I hope that's what you all are saying right now. But if there's some of you on the phone who are saying, you know what, I don't think this program is for me. Could you drop us a message in the chat and just let us know why that this isn't fitting your needs, so that, you know, as we look at designing other programs in the future, we can bear that in mind. But for those of you who are interested in moving forward, you know, here's the next step. First of all, the application is now open. It's open from January 14th. We opened it in January 14th all the way through April 13th. So not quite a month away. We have a very useful user's guide available on our website at njeda.com/bfloans. The application, the link to the application is also there. It's an online application. Prior to submitting an application, you need to send us an email at that dedicated email address called brownfieldsloan@njeda.com to be assigned a Brownfield loan officer. I mentioned this earlier, application fee is non-refundable. And then we're going to talk about the FAQs, the checklist, the required attachments, and the recommended attachments. Required information. So the way I would sort of describe this is that it's almost like kind of three buckets that we have when you're going to be uploading the information for your application. First of all, there's what we're calling required information. This is the information that's required when we talked about your baseline eligibility before. So these are the kinds of things that you'll need to provide to document that baseline eligibility for this program. If you don't provide these things, your application is going to be incomplete, it's going to be rejected. So it's very important that you include all of these items. On the next slides, we're going to talk about the information that we can use for scoring, and then information we can use for underwriting. But this is required information. So first of all, you need to have that Brownfield loan certification signed by the authorized representatives. You need a tax clearance certificate printed in the New Jersey Economic Development Authority's name. This only remains valid for 6 months. So if you have an older one, you're going to have to go and update it. The tax clearance certificates can be obtained by visiting the state of New Jersey's Premier Business Services portal online at the link shown here. We have an environmental activity summary. We'll talk a little more about that later, but that is a required element. Again, we talked about this earlier, proof of site control or path to site control. Again, you're going to need to provide us with something like either an executed letter of intent, signed and dated by both the applicant and the current site owner, or a copy of your purchase contract for the proposed site, as well as any financing agreements associated with the site. And if you already own the site, you could provide a copy of your deed. You need that support letter from the mayor. You need a property appraisal dated within 3 months of the application submittal, showing the property value at the time of application, as well as the value of the property in the remediated state. Any term sheets or commitments from any lenders or other sources of funding to the project, including any other federal, state, or local grants, if applicable. Information from lenders should reflect why the full project cost cannot be provided. That will demonstrate or help to demonstrate the funding gap that this loan would fill. Provide us with a timeline and construction schedules for both the remediation phase of the project and the proposed redevelopment phase following the completion of the remediation. We need copies of contracts with remediation professionals or contractors, supplemental information to validate your rate reductions. And again, if local finance board approval is required by either the local finance board or the municipality prior to applying for the loan, you would need to include that information, that documentation that you have received that. And then we also are requiring that you provide the signed notice for affirmative action and prevailing wage, which is, again, all of this is available on our website. The next piece I'm calling, this is like our documentation for scoring. Again, the scoring is that piece that is going to, give you access to the funds. The higher you score, the higher your rank is. So if you don't provide this information, it doesn't necessarily mean you're not eligible for the loan, but you might not score as high. And, everybody, I would think, would want to score as high as possible. So think of it as information that is wise to include with your application. So these are just examples of the types of information that you might want to include to support your score. This is not an all-inclusive list. So, for the first one, are you a nonprofit? So any documentation you can provide validating that. You'll notice I don't list criteria 2 and 3 on here. We're going to be evaluating those ourselves. Those are things such as, are you in an opportunity zone? What's the MRI? That kind of stuff. Number 4, consistency between the project and local redevelopment plans. Provide us links or copies to any applicable land use or redevelopment plans for the host municipality or the county, if applicable, and as well as the site plan approval from the host municipality, if applicable, so that you can earn those points there. Under economic benefits, if you've done a market or feasibility study that validates the projected economic benefits for the proposed end use of the site, for example, your job creation, your capital investment, or your projected tax revenue, you'd want to include that. And if you don't have a market or feasibility study, you'd want to provide some other documentation to demonstrate any economic benefits of the redevelopment project, particularly related to job creation, capital investment, and projected revenue. You'd also want to provide any copies of plans for hiring of local residents and workforce development training for those residents. Under criteria 6, the project viability and need for financing. Copies of any and all local, state, and federal approvals necessary to advance the project. If you have your company applicant overview, your background and experiences, including evidence of successful completion of projects of similar size and scope with the completion dates listed. You'd want to list your strategic partners and their history as well of completing projects. Under criteria 7, public health and environmental benefits, a letter from the project architect or other authorized representative outlining the energy efficient or green building standards as outlined on the application, and any information regarding whether a prior use was related to site contamination or how or when the current or suspected environmental condition was caused. And under criteria 8, stakeholder engagement, you provide us copies with your stakeholder engagement plans. If the project was discussed in that open public meeting, provide us a copy of the minutes from that meeting, or the agenda at least, when it's expected to be discussed if it hasn't been discussed yet. The next bucket is the financial analysis or our underwriting. So for applications that meet, again, that minimum score and there's funding available to satisfy the loan request, we'll advance the application over to our underwriting department for a financial analysis. And then an underwriter will be assigned. We're encouraging you to provide as much of the information as possible at the time of the initial application so that we have this ready for the financial analysis and can move more quickly through the underwriting process. However, for this section, any information that is missing or any additional information that is needed, the underwriting officer will notify the applicant, who will have 5 days from the date of notification to provide that information. So the kinds of things that we'd be looking for are listed on this slide, but your historic financial statements for the 3 most recent fiscal years, your interim statements, if that's more than 120 days old, or your completed business returns for the 3 most completed business tax returns for the 3 most recent years. For any 10% or more owner, a copy of their most recent tax return and personal financial statement, if not more than 90 days old from the date of the application. We'd want a summary of the type of organization, including the history and description of the organization, an org chart, identifying owners and percentages of owners if you have multiple partners, subscription agreements, 3 years of projections, including your balance sheets, your operating statements, reconciliation of the source and application of funds, and detailing of the assumptions used in preparing those projections. We also want to see, what other projects you have, what stage of development they're in, very detailed information, project type, size, location, funding sources, owner equity committed, and anticipated funding closing date and completion and occupancy date. And then again, demonstrating your history of successfully completed projects. We're going to be looking for a company overview, background, experiences, including evidence of successful completion of projects, and a schedule of portfolio assets. I mentioned our Brownfield loan certification. Again, this is on our website. This is a required element with your application. When what you're asserting to is that you didn't cause or contribute to the contamination. I think number 2 is sort of the biggest piece, that you have not been responsible in any way pursuant to any law for any contaminant at or emanating from the site, or contamination that has emanated from the site, other than by acquiring ownership of the site, if applicable, after all of the discharges occurred at the site. So you're going to be certifying to all 5 of these that are listed on this slide. But in the interest of time, I'm going to move forward. I mentioned earlier, there's also an environmental activity summary. Again, you can go to our website for more detail on this. This is also a required element. The kinds of things that you would want to include in this are going to be your environmental reports. If it's non-LSRP work, such as demolition, abatement, or removal activities, you're going to want that be prepared by the right kind of certified individual, whether that's a New Jersey licensed professional engineer, and a HERA certified professional, a New Jersey certified lead inspector, certified industrial hygienist, or other appropriate licensed certified professional. On number 2, we want to know about the history of the environmental contamination, or why do you suspect there's contamination. Again, this information is all on our website, but tell us, why do you think it's there? How did the site become contaminated? When? What was the prior use? How is that related to it? If the concerns are unknown, or if it's been abandoned for many years, tell us again, why do you think that it's contaminated? Number 3, just describe what work's already been done at the site, investigative and remedial work. For number 4, we're asking for, sort of a project narrative, summary description, and whether that's a description of the contamination of the site, of what currently exists at the site. What is your proposed investigation, assessment, and remedial activities? What is the current use of the site? The status of the site acquisition, current interest for redevelopment, the proposed redevelopment that will take place on the site, and the construction or redevelopment plans, as well as any proposed future use by the applicant. Number 5, we want to see a map showing all areas of concern and your sample locations, existing or proposed, and your remedial actions. For number 6, we really do want to see a very detailed and itemized third-party cost estimates that include all the eligible costs that you're asking for with this loan. And it needs to be signed by the LSRP, or again, if it's not site remediation work, another appropriate licensed professional. We want itemized costs. You should include at least a 15% contingency. You need to show detail, assumptions, and calculations. So if you're telling us that you're bringing in fill, how did you determine how much fill was needed? If you're doing demolition, give us the dimension of the structures. For any subcontractor cost over $25,000, we want that to be supported by a cost estimate by the potential subcontractors. Again, keep in mind that prevailing wage and affirmative action apply to both the remediation and redevelopment of the project. So your cost estimates should account for that and reflect the prevailing wage requirements. We also are asking that you provide a table of activities and estimated milestone dates, including as appropriate, the submittal dates of the reports. This is what the process is after you've submitted your application. There's a baseline. You'll submit it by April 13th. We'll review the baseline eligibility at the same time. We will then do a legal review. If it passes both of those, it goes to the scoring committee. We would then notify the board. It would go to underwriting. The board would then approve, decline, or waitlist. For those that went to, that were approved, they would go to closing. There would be the lien and the deed restriction. Then we get to disbursements, project monitoring, and the 10% retainage. Then we go into repayment, and then we close out the loan and remove the lien. Before I jump into the questions and answers, I did want to make a quick note right now, by the way, because I think the folks in this call might be interested. I mentioned earlier the Hazardous Discharge Site Remediation Fund, or HDSRF. I just wanted to let folks know that we are in the process of proposing regulations to conform with the amended legislation, and we are asking for input. You can email us at hdsrf@njeda.com to submit your input. Just, looking forward again, environmental justice, climate resilience, community engagement, brownfield incentive, the EPA RLF fund. There's just so much going on right now, and we're very excited about it. But at this time, I realize we're sort of at the end of this, but if we can keep it open for a few minutes, I'm happy to answer questions and accept questions from the audience now. But keep in mind, this is a competitive loan program, and therefore we are limited in the type of support that can be offered during a competitive round, and we can't provide specialized assistance to any specific applicant. We will also be accepting written questions and inquiries from potential applicants at Brownfields Loan at njeda.com until March 25th. We can't, again, accept phone calls or faxes for this. And any questions and answers will be posted in our FAQs, as well as, what we talk about here on this webinar. So, Valerie, do we have any questions?
Yes, we do. We have 6 at the moment.
Okay.
The first one is there an appeals process in case an application is denied at any stage? Is the appeal authority outside of NJEDA and EPA?
Okay, so yes, we have a standardized appeal process at NJEDA, and we will be following that process. The process is posted on our website. In order to appeal, there has to be a board decision associated with that. So if you if you have a board decision that does not allow your project to move forward, at that point, you would be eligible for an appeal.
Okay, and the next question, it looks like we have a request for a list of all municipalities and locations of the Brownfields properties that can be posted to the EDA website.
All right. So that is not something that EDA has. You're asking for a list of brownfield properties. So again, brownfields it's kind of subjective, right? So a brownfield property is a property that has contamination or suspected to have contamination and is either vacant or underutilized. So, if you have a gas station that leaked some petroleum, but it wants to remain a gas station, is that a brownfield, even though it's a known contaminated site? And I would say no. So, there's kind of two pieces to that. So there is not that one comprehensive list out there, but again, Sustainable New Jersey does work with certain municipalities who are interested in working on this to develop brownfield inventories. And they do update those, I believe, annually. And then there's also the SiteMart. However, as I mentioned earlier, SiteMart does have some of the information in that is older. So you'd want to look at the dates for when information was submitted.
The next question, is the ongoing Toms River Brownfield cleanup part of the NJEDA program?
So I am not sure what the question is on that one. So you're asking brownfield part of the EDA program. So I would say no, because we don't have a specific program unless you're talking about, are they applying for the brownfield loan? Maybe that's your question. And I wouldn't be able to divulge that information. And I'm sure there's more than one brownfield site in Toms River. Probably every community in New Jersey has more than one brownfield site. Again, if you look at that very general definition. So we'll have to probably move on to the next question.
How many applications have been submitted up to this point?
So again, I don't think that's an answer that we're going to be divulging to the public at this time, but I know we have interest. I know many people have reached out at this point to be assigned a brownfield loan officer. I suspect probably most people won't submit their application probably until the last minute, because that's how things usually work, although we'd certainly love to have people submit earlier.
And the last question that we have is there a requirement that the loan recipient retain ownership of the subject property for a certain period of time?
I'll have to talk a little bit to our closing department, but the one thing that kind of addresses this, I think, is that part about it. Once you get construction finance, you have to take us out. So I think that probably answers the question there. But other than that, no, we don't require you to retain ownership. But once you transfer the property and we're on that mortgage and we need to be taken out at that point, you would need to repay the loan. So I think those are the kinds of things that sort of like the details in there, but there's not a specific requirement that you retain ownership of the property.
And it looks like we have 2 questions in the chat.
Okay.
Hi, I trained to open my restaurant, is in construction now, but I need more money to finish the construction.
So I don't believe that's related to this particular program. This program would be specifically related to brownfields. So it's a restaurant that's looking for other kind of financing. I would suggest reaching out to our customer care email. And Valerie, do you happen to know what that is?
I believe that the email is customercare@njeda.com. And once I get that for sure, I will post that right into the chat.
Okay.
And Elizabeth, the last question that looks like we have is only seasoned operators. So I'm not sure if there's an expansion on that or if you know exactly what that means, but that's the question.
I do not know what that means. No, if the question is, can only seasoned developers apply? The answer is no. You know, we're allowing anyone to apply. However, you do need to demonstrate to us that you can get the job done. And so in the scoring criteria, you'll definitely see information in there related to showing that you've been able to complete other projects in similar size and scope. And then again, at some point you'll, you know, hopefully go to the underwriting department, and then the underwriting department will need to evaluate whether or not it's an appropriate application and we're able to underwrite successfully.
So it looks like that was our final question. Does anyone else have any other questions? Okay, it looks like that may be it, Elizabeth.
Okay, well, thanks everybody for joining. We really do appreciate this.
Oh, I'm sorry, one final question. Will a replay be available?
So Valerie, I believe we will be posting this to our website. I don't know the timing of how long that will take, but yes, we'll have this available on our website, probably our YouTube channel as well. And we should have the slides too.
Perfect. All right, thank you, everyone.
Thanks.